Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Russell Martin.
Hey, everybody. So you have a youth worship team and you have some talented students. How do you go about encouraging and equipping them to take leadership and be part of your adult worship team? That's what we're talking about. But first, before we do that, I want to welcome you back to the podcast or to the podcast for the first time. So if you are a longtime listener or a first-time listener, we're thrilled to have you here. If you're new, a couple things to tell you about. Go to studentministryconversations.org. We have past episodes. We have show notes, we have articles. Also follow us at Talk Student Men on all your social media places. And don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen. Our goal here with each conversation is to inspire and encourage and equip and empower you to pour into lives of your students. And we hope that this episode and all of ours give you those tools and knowledge you need to serve your church and your community more effectively. So this week, I'm excited to have Melissa Glaves join us on the podcast. Melissa is a returning guest. Her first episode was episode 6, Cultivating Worship in Youth Ministry. And we talked about youth worship teams and building those and creating those. That episode actually held the most downloaded episode for the majority of season 1 and into season 2. And so I encourage you to go back and listen, especially if you are working to develop a youth worship team. But today we're coming back and talking about a long-awaited part 2. Yeah,
it's been a minute.
And we are talking about cultivating those youth worship leaders, maybe in your youth team that have the skills and the abilities to serve with your adult worship team and your adult services. So sit back, listen, and I can't wait to dive into this important conversation with Melissa Glaves. So Melissa, the first time you joined us, you told us who you were, but I'm sure there are a lot of people now who have not gone back to episode 6. If you are, I encourage you to. You can hear the beginnings of this podcast. Melissa and I met on what's that? Clubhouse, yes. And
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, and back in the pandemic days when we couldn't do anything but sit on Clubhouse and stay at home and start a podcast. So, Melissa, can you tell us a little bit about you and catch people up on who you are and what you do,
Sure.
and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, well, I got more story now because it's been a couple years, but I was born and raised in Soldotna, Alaska. I lived there for about 31 or 2 years. Met my husband there, had all 3 of our children there. Came to know the Lord when I was 7 at a Continentals concert. Do you remember the Continentals? The choir that toured everywhere. I answered an altar call. I know, we're throwing it back. Like I said, I got a lot of life behind me. And so I answered an altar call at 7 years old. Ended up touring with the Young Continentals when I was 11 years old. That was my first mission trip. Have been leading worship ever since. God has graced me to lead worship now as a staff member at 3 churches. The first one was the one that I grew up in. They watched me grow up on the platform, and was able to become the worship leader of that church in my early 20s, and then ended up moving from Alaska to Spokane, Washington, where my husband worked at Gonzaga, and I ended up on staff at another church. And then as a satellite campus worship pastor. And then from there, ended up moving to the Omaha Metro of Nebraska. And with a connection that I had made in Spokane, it just, God moved me out here, uprooted my family, and moved cross country for my worship pastor role here. And so now I am the Calvary Bellevue South and Next Gen worship pastor at Calvary Christian Church. And so it's a super fun, dynamic role where I'm leading worship for adults on Sunday mornings in our broadcasting campus. So it's our campus and online. And then on Wednesday nights and for tons of events, I lead worship for our Next Gen Ministries, which is like first grade and up, basically. I have influence on their worship experience, which is a big job and a lot of fun, and encompasses a lot of things that I'm passionate about. So it's a good deal.
Awesome. And so with all that experience with youth and worship and adult worship teams, it kind of leads us to what we are talking today. And I'm a big proponent of letting youth lead, both in their groups, but also I don't think we just need to relegate students to the student ministry stage,
Right.
but to identify those and to bring those up and give them opportunities to do that. So I know it's important, it's important, but why don't you tell our listeners kind of why that is important, or why you think that's important to do?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit of a passion project for me, in that there have been people very close to me that have fallen away from the church when they couldn't find their place anymore. Like, they were raised in the church, they were involved in youth group and worship and all sorts of things. And then once they aged out of youth group, they didn't know where they fit anymore. And so I'm basically doing for one what I wish I could do for everyone, and that is to help our students understand as early as possible where they fit in the body of Christ for the rest of their life. And so I work with the students that are involved in worship and tech, and I train them up in like low pressure situations like youth group, where it's, a little bit, I don't know. I don't want to say the quality is not, like, the expectation is not as high, because it is, but it's just a little bit, it feels like less pressure when there's not, like, the lead pastor in the room every day, or, whatever the case may be. And so I train them up on Wednesday nights, and then as I think they're ready, or as I just want to give them a challenge, move them into the Sunday morning experiences, and get them involved with our adult team as well.
I think that's it's something we've talked about on the podcast several times with different episodes, is kind of that difference, and the fact that, this goes from Barna research and some other research, Fuller Youth Institute research, talking about the fact that if students aren't involved in the main service, in the main deal, that if we relegate them to student ministry and then they graduate, like you said, and they have no clue, they go off to college and are looking for something like it was in youth. And Sam Halverson talked about this. It was, I think it was episode 29, and integrating youth into the body of the church. And he was talking about those things about, whether it's all the time, or, you need to find ways, either not to have that youth service, or on Sunday, or however you do it. I know different churches have different ways of doing things, but is to find those ways to have them involved. And this is one of those ways. So I do want to talk a little bit about, what you look for and how you identify those things. But let's suppose that you have found those people. What is your process? You talked a little bit about giving them opportunity. So what are some specific things, or some things you think about when you're taking someone from leading on a Wednesday night or leading with their youth group to getting them involved? So we'll start off practical and then go a little more theoretical.
Sure.
What are some of those practical steps that you do use?
So it's really an individualized thing. Like, there's not like an age or anything like that. There's no real, like, cut and dry marker of, okay, you're ready now. It's more, are they coachable? Are they competent? What's their character like? And I didn't say those in the right order. Are they coachable? What's their character like? Are they competent? And not that I need my Sunday morning people to be perfect, because then I wouldn't even be on stage, and that's ridiculous. But I do want, like, as I offer students or anyone more opportunity, I want them to be the kind of person that our church should look like. Like, I want them to be compassionate. I want them to be caring. I want them to own up for their mistakes, because they're going to make them. And so there's that.
All right. So, I mean, you mentioned those, and you talked about this last time, this coachable, but
yes,
don't go too much detail, but just kind of tell us a little bit about what do you look for with someone who's coachable? Because these three things are going to apply no matter what: youth
right.
worship team, adult worship team, finding youth interns for the summer or whatever like that. So
Right.
just what are just some real quick, like, what makes someone coachable? What do you help define character, and how do you know if they're competent?
Sure. So for coachability, I'm looking for someone who can take feedback. Like, do they want to learn, and are they willing to? So it's great if they ask for feedback. Most students don't. They just don't know to do it. And a lot of times, if they just want a compliment. They don't really want to hear, well, we got a little bit off the click right here. This is something you can practice for next time. In a lot of cases. But the ones that will take that in and learn from it, even if they don't want to hear it in the moment, that's a coachable kid or a coachable person. I have students on my team that, in the area of competency, like, that's the one that I need my Sunday morning teams to be competent, more than on a Wednesday night. So for my youth team, if they can hold a tune and sing melody, great. For my Sunday morning team, I really need harmonies. And so that's a really good benchmark for when a vocalist is ready for that move. For people playing instruments, it's okay, what if our singer shows up sick and we have to play this song in a different key? Like, will you be able to do that? Guitarists have capos. We use digital keyboards, so we can transpose. There's things to help make that easier. But I need it to not fluster them. And so there's a measure of confidence that I can recognize in someone, along with that competency piece.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we kind of got off a little bit, and if you want more on that, I know she goes more into this in that first episode. But go back. So if you go back to the original question, if you have somebody in your team and you've identified them, so what else do you do to help them come into the adult team? And I'm thinking too, like, I mean, this is not just musical ability, but this is getting along with adults. This is
right.
You probably have a different practice routine and things. So are there some steps? Do you just throw them into the wolves, or how do you help them to move into that adult role?
It depends on the age of the students, but often I will talk to their parents about it first. This is so fun. You'll love this. My two electric guitar players on Sunday mornings are my youngest and my oldest worship team members. There's a 56-year age gap between them, which is incredible. It's one of my favorite things. But in having that huge age gap, that younger electric guitar player was 12 when he joined my team, my adult team. And so I went to his parents first, and his mom's on staff here at the church. And I said, look, I would love to have your son on my Sunday morning team. Do you mind getting him here? Because a lot of times for students, it's a matter of, can they get a ride? And he's a busy kid. He is a multiple sport athlete. he's the oldest of three. So like their family is in a really busy season. And so a lot of times it's just a kindness, I think, to talk to parents first and make sure that if you're offering opportunity, it's not going to be, a strain. And so that's part of it. And then, like you said, anytime you bring somebody on the team, you're wondering, how are they gonna interact with the team? How are they gonna fit? It's a culture. It's a culture thing. Like anytime you bring somebody onto your team, you are potentially shifting the culture of your team. And so it's always, I hate to use the word risk because that feels a little dramatic, but it's always a factor. We'll call it that.
Well, I mean, it is because, in some cases you have somebody who's played forever and that's their spot and they've done this, and all of a sudden some 12-year-old's coming up, and it's like, it's like having the all-star quarterback who's played with you for your NFL team forever, and all of a sudden you draft a rookie.
Right.
And there's those thoughts and things like, I mean, have you had to deal with some of the either adults saying, hey, no, we don't want to do that, or any of those kind of issues, or have you worked that into it's so part of your culture that it's not a problem?
It's definitely part of our culture. And I've only been in this role for less than 3 years, but as far as my experience and the way that I lead, it is always a part of culture that I expect people to have someone ahead of them and someone that they're bringing up. That's how we do things. It's a Titus 2 situation, where the olders train up the youngers, and the youngers are a good example. And so I've only had to deal with, this is terrible. I've only had to deal with that feeling displaced type of situation with vocalists.
Do tell more.
Vocalists, and I am one, but vocalists are a very emotional people. I mean, artists in general are, but I think with people that play an instrument, it's outside of them. And even, like, okay, I play the keys. This is the thing that I do. Vocalists tend to run a little bit more on the side of, this is who I am. I think it's because it comes out of them. Their instrument is inside their body. And so I've only had to deal with that displaced situation with vocalists.
If you go back and watch this video, you're going to actually see a light bulb go off in my head. Like I just get like this because that is like, I had never even thought about that, about the difference between, if you're playing an instrument, you are playing an instrument. If you're singing, you are the instrument.
Right.
And why that probably adds a little more balance, or not balance, but you have to deal a little more delicately with that, because you can tell someone that they're not doing well because of an instrument they're playing, or because you can change that. You can change your strings or out of tune or anything like that, but you can't change the vocal. So that's wow. So I'm just going to think about that for a little bit.
Well, and I say that with all of the love and grace and understanding in the world, because like I said, I am a vocalist. I mean, I also play guitar and a little bit of keys and whatever, but I understand.
Yeah. So I'm just going to think about that. I'm gonna give you another question to talk on, and I'm just going to think about that. So we did talk about kind of how you do that. I mean, one of the things that we would do, and maybe you do something similar, is, and this is with anybody joining a worship team, but especially youth, pick a song that you do well. And let's do that for an offertory or for a one song. I mean, how do you temper them in? Do you just throw them in and they're doing all 8 songs or all 4 songs or whatever on a Sunday morning?
Yeah.
Or do you use some things like that to help them get used to it? Or how many practices have they come to before? Or
sure. So usually by the time I'm adding a student to my adult team, they have been doing full services at youth on a regular basis normally. And so there really isn't a tempering for that. We use the same equipment and the same programs in our youth ministry as we do for our Sunday morning. The schedule is a little bit different. It's more staging than anything, to be honest. It's like, okay, this is when we load and this is when we leave, and this is what our run through looks like, and yeah, we don't noodle during rehearsal anymore.
Can you teach my adults that? Like, that's what I need to.
I know. My husband's my drummer. I've said that before, and he can be the worst. And I just turn around and I'm like, you are 43 years old. But yeah, it's more teaching them the staging, the rhythms, the professionalism maybe side of, like, this is how the adults do it. But that being said, my adult team has a blast. And so, like, it's not dry or staunch or anything like that. It's, it's just teaching teenagers how to be one of the adults.
Well, I mean, I like what you said about having the same equipment and same stuff. Do y'all do a lot of the same songs as well?
There's a little bit of overlap now. There wasn't at first. I think our Sunday morning situation could probably not handle some of the youth ministry songs. Our youth ministry really likes the jumpy ones. And I mean, that being said, since our students are used to the more high energy songs, they are more expressive in their leadership than a lot of our adults. And so it brings this incredible energy to my Sunday morning team, which I love. And so I don't know, it's a really fun interplay as more and more students are joining my Sunday morning team. I think I have like 5 or 6 in my Sunday morning rotation now, with more on the horizon. So it's been really fun, and our congregation loves it. Every time I have a student on stage, I have people coming up to me that are just, I love seeing the kids who love Jesus. It's really, really good. It's good for the life of your church. And if you don't have students in your ministry, I mean, they're the church, so
yeah,
you gotta be careful.
I
tell people all the time, like, if you don't have students in your ministry, it's one generation from dying. So, that might sound harsh, but it's true.
Well, you went back to that Titus, mentoring and stuff. And one of my questions was, what role does mentorship, play within that? What I'm also hearing is, like, it's not just adults, teaching the kids, but the kids teaching the adults too. So, you have examples, or what are some other ways that you see that where both the students and the adults are getting from this, and what are they getting from this relationship as they come in?
Right. I am blessed with the adults on my team. All love when the students are there. They love the energy. They love teaching them things. They're great. And a lot of times I will have students show up to rehearsal even if they're not scheduled, and they'll jump in at front of house and learn lights, or they'll stand next to the person that's doing what they usually do that week and learn how they do it. I have a student drummer who, for months, he's never played on my adult team. He's fantastic for our student team and is always growing. And he's a sophomore finishing up his sophomore year, and I will probably work him onto my adult team next year, now that he's driving and everything. But he showed up for months and sat next to my husband and just honed his skills on the drums and hung out with the team. And if he's having a hard time getting something down for our youth songs, he'll come to my husband, or we have a lot of drummers around here that are always like behind the scenes. He'll go to one of them and be like, how do I simplify this? And how do I make this playable for me? And so it's great for him because he's learning. It's great for our drummers and our adult team because they get to teach. And I think it speaks to both sides, the importance of what they do. Like our adults are like, oh, this young person is looking to me for guidance. And the young person is like, oh, this adult is taking the time to guide me. And it's very cool. Also, like I said, their energy on stage is contagious. It's so fun. We do full production and broadcast from our campus. And so we have a monitor in the back where we can see like what's on the video feed. And there are a lot of times where you'll see like one of our students on stage on the video feed, and all of the adults start smiling like because they are just, the joy that comes off of those kids is just amazing. And the flip side of that, like I've had some look scared, and then we have really good conversations in the green room that are, hey, you know what, you look like you might have been a little scared out there. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about why leading worship isn't scary, like because it's for Jesus. The people on the floor, like we're leading them, we love them, but their opinion of what we're doing, really not that big of a deal. As long as you're glorifying God, you're doing what you're supposed to. And so that's been really great too.
Well, one of the things that you bring up, and this is something that I really, I guess, always struggled with, students and adults, just because like there's a grind, right? There's songs, there's learning those, there's the week, there's practice, there's the stuff. Is I am always admire your taking time to teach, not teach the song, not teach the chords, but to teach worship. And this is completely off of what but it fits in because we're talking about doing this with adults and students.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, talk a little bit more about that teaching. That's what, if I was going to put a name on it, I would say you're teaching the intangibles of worship.
Right.
And so, I mean, do you have anything else about that?
Oh, well, I teach it because it's just who God made me to be. Like I love developing the culture of our worship and our church. And I think just the more our students understand that, that's going to come out in their conversations. And the more our Sunday morning teams understand that, that's going to come out in conversation. I think I've probably said before that like the best compliment that I can receive is not, hey, you have a beautiful voice. It's, hey, I felt God move today. And so just putting that vision in front of my team, and most of them, they know. Like it's not like I'm having to have like these deep discipleship conversations with people that are, performance-y or anything like that. And that's not probably a word, but I'm using it. And so I think it's just important to keep that that focus in front of people, that this is really by Jesus and for Jesus. All things are, from him and through him and for him. And so like it just, our stage worship needs to be an outpouring of what's really happening inside of us. And so, what's your personal worship time look like? You know, when you're on stage, we're aware of the people, but it's not about them. We're leading the people. We're inviting them into the presence of God, and we're stewarding it as best we can. And so we have a lot of conversations around that. We have a lot of conversations around, yes, we strive for excellence, but we strive for excellence because Jesus is worth it. And we strive for excellence because that removes distractions for the people that we're trying to lead. We talk about stage presence. Yes, we want to look confident on stage. Why? Because that makes our congregation comfortable. If we look scared, they're going to feel bad for us, and that's going to distract them from worshiping. And so we practice good stage presence for our congregation's comfort, for the invitation and encouragement that is for them to worship along with us. And so just everything we talk about as far as the competencies is balanced with the why, the spiritual side of this is why we do this in the context of worship. Oh, I can't hear you.
I made the ultimate Zoom mistake. I clicked it twice. Went to mute. One of my questions is how do you balance the need to involve and empower youth, worship leaders, and also there is, it's not a performance, but like you said, with distractions and things like this, there is a quality element, and it's a little higher sometimes for that service. And you have a great farm team of youth in the youth band that are coming up, but not everybody has that. Sometimes they don't have a youth team or they're working to develop that. And so go ahead.
It took a couple of years to develop that. So the last time I was on the podcast, I think I said I had probably just like 3 girls that were singing with me. And now oftentimes I'm the only adult on stage. And that's just because I can't get my 14-year-old son to lead a song. He's one of my vocalists. He's very good, but he's just like, he's a 14-year-old boy. He's afraid his voice is going to betray him. I get it. And so I have the farm team for sure. But so moving students onto the adult stage, there's a couple of things that you have to be willing to do. You have to be willing to potentially sacrifice quality for the long-term payoff of a new team member with fresh energy and developing someone, calling them into their gifting and potentially releasing them into that calling. Like there's so many students that I have had on my Sunday morning stages that are leading worship in other places. I've been doing this a long time, but so that's part of it. You have to be willing to sacrifice a little bit of the quality sometimes. Running tracks really helps with that because you can develop them, but also kind of hide them a little bit if you need to. We can bring in tracks for, that part really isn't working on that song, but your presence is great. Having you on the team is important and valuable. And so here's what we're going to do. And I don't always tell them that I'm hiding them. Some kids can handle it. Some kids can't. Some kids are really thankful that you do that. So that's part of it. You have to be willing to sacrifice a little bit, but also like, what a cool thing to invite your congregation into watching someone develop. Like, my daughter plays bass for my Sunday morning team. Sometimes she's more of a fill-in. She doesn't like waking up that early. She's almost 17. So, but she's improved in front of the church. I improved in front of the church, and people recognize it and they celebrate it. And those are really cool conversations to have as well. That, yeah, look what God's doing in that kid. Like as a congregation, we're allowing that gift to be developed, by, maybe that kid played that entire song in the wrong key, but he did it for the glory of God. And so, yeah, you have to be willing to sacrifice the quality a little bit sometimes. And as a leader, you can decide where that line is for you and your team and your church. But also, like, there's this really, really cool side of it where, people get to recognize growth and they love it. And so that's been my experience, at least. I've never had anybody come up to me and say that teenager should not be on stage. So,
and part of that goes with, what's going to be distracting, and when somebody is or isn't ready. And I think we started talking about this, and I said, we're going to cut some other things before we get back to this, but, and you've mentioned a few things, but what else are, and you said age wasn't a deal, but you did talk about, driving is sometimes helpful, and you're going to lean towards that. So what other things, like, how do you identify really, and maybe this more is a question of how do you identify potential worship leaders in your student population? Sometimes they're not the ones who are chomping at the bit saying, I want to do this, but what are some things you look for in those situations?
Sure. So calling students from the floor to the platform in a Wednesday night setting, some of them come up to me and they're like, I play this instrument. Can I be on the team? Yeah, let's check it out. Let's train you on in-ear monitors. Let's, send me a video. I usually have vocalists send me a video, things like that. But for the ones that don't come up to me, you can recognize, like, you can almost tell whether or not somebody can sing by looking at them while they're worshiping. Like, how comfortable are they? If I see a student who is, like, very expressive in their worship, I at least know that they understand worship and the value of it, to some degree. And so I can start that conversation with them and be like, hey, you know what? I really love seeing you worship on Wednesday night. It seems like you really enjoy it. Like, tell me more about that. And so sometimes they're like, yeah, I just really like music and I can't sing, but it's fun. And that's great. And then you thank them for leading from the floor and encouraging the people around them, to worship. Sometimes they're like, I really love to sing, but I'm scared. And in those cases, that's another conversation where it's like, okay, well, tell me about that. And I don't know if I have the force or something, but I just watched Star Wars the other night. So I don't know if I have the force or something, but anytime that I have looked a student in the eyes and told them singing for Jesus isn't scary, they're like, okay. And then they try it. And some of them, usually they really enjoy it. Some of them need more encouragement after the first time. And some of them, they're like, you know what? I really prefer just worshiping Jesus from the floor. And that's totally okay too. Because those students that are leading among the congregation are so valuable to the culture of your worship. So
do you have that same hesitancy with some of those who are on the stage? But is kind of a little bit of the same process. You have some of those who hide, hey, I'm doing youth. I would never want to do adult. But do you have ways that you see the talent and abilities in them, or are they all just chomping at the bit? Or kind of how do you move people from that to there? Some will want to, some will be like, I know I had those who asked me, hey, when can I sing with the adults? When can I sing with the adults?
Right.
And then I had some.
Those are usually not the ones you want.
Yeah. A word for today. Just know that's, and sometimes they are, but I think with that, you're more going into the competency may be there, but you're looking more at that coachable part. Like if they're the one chomping at the bit, you got to ask a little more of those questions of, are you coachable? Are you willing to stay? But you also have those who are content to sit on the drums or content to lead, that you look at and go, hey, you know what? You would be good for this. Like, how do you identify and encourage those and convince them or help them to see that they are ready for something like that?
Sure. It really is like the ones that are unsure or content where they are, or, really maybe haven't thought about it. It really is for me, a Holy Spirit prompting of like, or just a notice of, you know what, like I could call them to more. Sometimes it's an offer, like, I'm going to offer them an opportunity. Those are usually the ones that want it, that you're offering them the opportunity. Sometimes you're calling them up, with the ones that are hesitant, and you're speaking life into the gifts that God gave them. And you're saying, I see your heart for worship. I see your dedication to practice. I see how you've continually improved over the last however long. Would you be interested in trying a service with the adult team and see what you think? I think managing expectations on the front end of that is a big deal. Some students want you to say, you're on the rotation from the jump. Some students are like, would you be willing to try this once and see how it goes? And they're way more comfortable with that. And this is my mama heart. My students in Spokane call me worship mama. That hasn't caught on here, but they did back there. My mothering heart is always trying to balance opportunity and protection. Like some students just like maybe aren't ready for one reason or another. It could be competency, it could be confidence, it could be a whole multitude of things. Like maybe their little heart just can't handle the stress. Maybe they're not going to be able to, worship and, execute that their best because they're anxious. And so it's always balancing, like, what are they capable of, with their competency? What are they comfortable with? And never am I ever, willing to put a student on the Sunday morning stage if for any reason they are not ready to it. And that's part of the coachability part, where like they can get up and they can make a mistake and it's not going to wreck them. I always want to protect their heart, especially on my particular platform now, because it goes on the internet and it's there forever. And so, yeah, I am protective a little bit, not of my platform really, like, because I'm not, but protective of the people and their hearts in that. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, I had to get to my unmute button. So we're wrapping up, and I have two final questions. The last question will be, what final advice do you have for people who want to do this? So, just kind of speaking to the youth leaders. But before that, one of the things that popped into my head is you're doing both of these right now. You are working with the youth and working with the adults, but that may not always be the case. There may be a youth leader who's has a youth that would be great, but they're having to work with somebody else. Do you have any thoughts? I mean, it's not something you deal with, but maybe you've seen that, or any thoughts of how either a adult worship leader could, I mean, just both of the balances of crossing that line and having two different people in those roles with different expectations and different.
Sure. So I always work from the basis of relationship. It's just the best way to do things, in my opinion. It's the way God built me. Everything is tied to relationship for me. And so I have been the small campus worship pastor working with the youth who wanted to get so everywhere I've been, youth is centralized. And so even though I was a campus worship pastor, a lot of the youth that I was working with were attending a different campus than me with a different worship leader. And so I've had to have those conversations of, hey, this student is really good, and I really think that we could be offering them opportunity, calling them to more, whatever the case may be. And there's a trust there that you need to develop with the other leaders that you're working with. I think getting really clear parameters of like, what do you need each position to be capable of? Like, what do you need your electric guitar players to be capable of to be an effective member of your Sunday morning team? What do you need your vocalists to be capable of to be an effective member of your Sunday morning team? And a lot of times, those are simple things, like vocalists need to be able to sing harmonies and pick out harmonies by ear. They need to understand, to at least to some degree, blending with other vocalists. Cool. That's something that I can work with that student on to get them ready for whatever's next. And so, yeah, I would say communication is most important. And invite, like, if you are a youth worship leader or leading worship for the youth, invite whoever is leading that department or the campus or whatever on a Sunday morning. Invite that person to come and like be a part of your rehearsal, speak into those students, like invite them to start those relationships as well. Again, to bridge that gap of like, when you're not a student anymore, you still have a place in the church with these adults who know you. And as a youth worship person, you can only invite, like, you can't make your adult worship leader accept that invitation or lean into it or be pumped about it. But you can invite, and you can invite often, and you can introduce, like we do team nights, where we invite our whole, so we have the 3 campuses. And so we invite our whole creative departments, all of our volunteers, we call them difference makers, to come together and do some cross-campus team building and hanging out and fellowship, and we all worship together and things like that. I invite my student team to those, and end up with, a table of teenagers who are now interacting with, hey, these are my 2 student bass players. This is my buddy Carl. He leads on the bass at, the Shadow Lake campus. And so just kind of, again, building relationships, networking my students in with the adults, having the adults, see the kids. Something that I think really helps as well is that when we do youth events, my youth are not leading worship for youth events. My youth are students at youth events. And so the adult teams have to come in and help me and lead worship for our students. And that's a really cool connecting point as well. A lot of times our students will come up on stage and, like, after the worship set is over, And, hey, I do this on Wednesday night. My name's, whatever. And it's great to meet you. And, like I said, we have the culture here where our adults are very welcoming and excited about that. And so that's been a blessing. It was super, super easy to develop that with the personalities that we have around, which was really, really nice.
Well, I'm just probably going to leave it with that, but do you have anything else, anything last minute for, because we are talking to youth pastors, any encouragement to them who are looking to kind of either raise up their own or help their students lead more?
Sure. There's no junior Holy Spirit, right? And so I would say, trust students with as much as you can, because students are incredible. They will rise to whatever bar you set for them. Most of them are eager to please. In that, like alongside of that, be a human. Like this generation craves authenticity like no other. They have polished, fake, curated information coming to them from all sides. And when they recognize something that's real, it speaks to their heart. And the church needs to be real. If we're going to continue to engage these young people that we love so much. Yeah.
I mean, that's just a great word for youth leaders, pastors, everybody working with them. Well, I definitely want to dive in sometime, and we won't wait another 96 episodes before we do it again. But you talked about a mentorship program that y'all do. And I would really love to pick your brain and dive into, because again, that's empowering, after youth and the, next gen, and empowering them for leadership in the church. And so I would love to dive that in. So hopefully you'll come back and do that again sometime. But thank you so much for being here. As we wrap up, I want to remind you, if you are a regular listener, tell somebody else about this. Tell somebody else about Melissa's episode, and tell somebody else about Melissa's first episode. We kind of went a little niche with the worship leading part, but I know it's something that's involved in a lot of different ministries or people wanting to do that. And so I have an episode on worship leading with students and building worship teams. And so you can find more about that. And when you find those, make sure and share those with your friends, and share us at Talk Student Men. Also, if you loved this episode or any of them, I know most people don't leave reviews, and it's kind of hard to leave a comment and to take that step, but take that step. Just let us know kind of how you liked it, because every review and every comment helps us get broadcast more and brings us more prominent with all the different podcast episode things and playlists and things like that. So also, if you are like Melissa and would be interested in being a guest on the show, we believe everybody has something to share. Everybody has a gift and a talent and something they're doing well in student ministry. And we get better when we share these conversations. And that was the whole point of this podcast, was to capture those conversations that you have with someone else and put them somewhere where people who may not be able to go to, may not be able to go see Melissa, or may not be able to go to youth conferences or things like that, can get these conversations. And so if you're interested in being a guest, or someone who would be a great guest, email us, podcast@studentministryconversations.org. We're always glad to hear from you. And we look forward to having you come on as well. So again, Melissa, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have ways, have they changed, or let's go ahead and just give us again the ways that we can get a hold of you if somebody has more questions.
The ways to get a hold of me are just ridiculously easy. So my Instagram handle is Melissa K. Glaves, and my email address is melissa.glaves@calvary.ch.
All right. And we will put those in the podcast notes for this week. Again, thank you all. Thank you, Melissa, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you, or you will see us in next week's episode. Y'all have a great week.